Hello, my name is Kazim Abdullah. I'm from the Music Division of the Library of Congress, and I'm here in Coolidge Auditorium with the esteemed Calidor String Quartet. The Calidor String Quartet was started and founded in 2010 at the Colburn School in Los Angeles, and its members are Jeffrey Myers, Ryan Meehan, Jeremy Berry on viola, and then Estelle Choi at the cello. They are here to record a concert for our annual Stradivarius concert, our Stradivari concert. Every year we invite a different string quartet to come and to play on our Strad instruments. So many string quartets had residencies or played on these instruments. The Hungarian String Quartet, the Budapest String Quartet, the Juilliard String Quartet was the last one to really have a residency. And so one can definitely say that the art of playing string quartets is really a tradition passed down from one generation to the next. And I'm curious for you all as a quartet, what do you define as your group aesthetic, and what did you inherit from your mentors, considering that all these great quartets have played here and played on these instruments, and yeah, you know, you guys have studied with some of the great quartets of the 20th century, so I'm curious about that.
I think in our early days, we were very influenced by, and still are, by the Guarneri String Quartet. One of our first teachers was Arnold Steinhardt, from the first violinist. And from them, we adopted this idea of the amazing vocal expression that you can have in the sound that you can produce on the string instruments, that was kind of a hallmark of their style of playing. We also studied quite a lot with the Alban Berg String Quartet, giving a Viennese perspective. We inherited a lot of the ideas of how to interpret Germanic music from our work with Günter Pichler, who was the first violinist, in terms of organizing beat structure and learning how to interpret the markings of each composer, how dynamics can differ from composer to composer, and things of that nature. And also, we've worked quite extensively and performed quite a bit with the Emerson String Quartet. And from them, we've learned countless things about interpreting the music we play, how to program concerts, and how to sustain a career, because very few people have achieved what they've achieved in the realm of string quartets.
No, for sure. So, I mean, you know, we are living in an increasingly virtual world where instruments like these can seem to be just beautiful artifacts from a distant time and by distant makers. And I'm curious, what for you individually are the most resonant factors of an experience like this, playing on instruments that aren't yours, that have a storied history or have come from a storied maker?
Well, for me, so to play a Stradivarius is kind of something that you dream of as a kid, seeing all of the great soloists come through town and, you know, reading in their bio that they're playing a Stradivarius from 17 whatever, and yeah, and just I've always been mesmerized by the man, the maker, Stradivarius, and like what secrets he had and what he's really inspired. I mean, thinking about these instruments, they've been around since all of the pieces we'll perform have been around, and those composers, these instruments, they might not have seen these instruments, but they saw instruments similar to these and were inspired by them, and that's kind of amazing to think about, that they've not just inspired musicians, but it inspired the composers and the music that we love and get to play every day.
And if you think of the form itself, it has been perfected and has not changed since then. For over 300 years, we're still coming back to these blueprints of creating these instruments. Obviously, something right was done.
Yeah, try to name another field where that's the case, right? I mean,
exactly.
If there are things, they would be a small handful where something was perfected at such a magnificent extent that in that many times and with so many developments of research and science and technology that it still hasn't really been beat. And obviously he was so famous for a reason. I mean, these instruments sound fantastic, and it's an inspiration to play in the moment. We are all fortunate in that we do have very nice instruments, but there's a different degree of inspiration that you get by hearing, okay, wait, this is a possibility now. This sound can happen, this color can happen. And I think the only thing that makes me sad is like I don't have more time to figure out even more possibilities with the instrument, because there is unlimited potential in all 4 of these instruments that you see on stage. And it's just so much fun to see what we can create and what's different, what's possible. And then hopefully we can, come back and translate some of that to our own instruments after as well, but we'll see.
Okay. What kinds of things can one learn as a player from performing on rare instruments? Yeah, I mean,
I think,
how does it inform your other, how do you think it can inform how you approach the music or?
well, we're often quick to blame our tools, what we have. And in some cases, it's fair. It's absolutely fair. We don't always have these amazing opportunities to play these rare instruments. That being said, I think that being able to hear the colors and the timbres of these old instruments, no matter what instrument you're playing or you're going to be going back to, it's going to change the way you play that instrument. You're going to be looking for those sounds, and yeah, it probably won't exactly be the same, but you're informed by everything you hear every day, and if you know that it's possible, there's a chance that you can recreate that. You may have, the mechanics may have to be slightly altered. You may not have an incredible luthier who can come in and adjust the instruments and keep them in incredible condition. But then you can start to seek out, maybe, maybe I can have my instrument adjusted in a way where it allows me to speak this line out, brings out this line. You start to hear different things, even though we are all on new old instruments. As a quartet, it's so funny. It still has that sound. Each individual sounds like themselves on each different instrument. But then you can hear different nuances of our personalities, I think. These instruments that somehow pull these elements out from us.
Yeah, when I first saw you play on the instruments on the stage and you guys were going out into the audience, I'm curious when you heard each other, what was it like, oh, this person sounds really glorious, even more glorious than they normally do on the instruments? I'm curious, what was your impression?
I think it was actually me that went out first to hear the group play, and then they all looked at me and asked what it sounded like. It's like, you know what, it still really sounds like our quartet, but just worth a lot more money. Well, no, but as Estelle was saying, like the personalities were there. Jeff sounded like Jeff, Ryan like Ryan, and Estelle had her same sound, but there was just I don't know, it's kind of like hearing something in like 8K versus 4K. It's just like, there's just like this definition and layering and nuance that's just, it's just different. Like the bass personality, similar, but then just with more everything.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And I know that, I wonder whether you might find that you play or think about some things differently on modern instruments after this experience. What?
Yeah, these instruments here, they have very strong personalities of their own. So, of course, we pick up the instrument and we try to play it the way we played our instruments that we're used to. And that can get us to a certain point and show us like, oh, this instrument sounds different this way. But I found myself in the few hours that we have by ourselves with the instruments to explore, trying to listen to the instrument and try to play maybe in a different way than I might have already, and see just what happens, see what happens. It's like a chemistry lab. You like put something else in and see what the result is. And that has been really fun and exciting, because my instrument has one way it likes to be played, and that might not necessarily be the best way for this instrument. But I think that when I go back to my violin, I might second guess certain assumptions I've made about it as well. Okay. Because
if I can ask you, Ryan, then what did you discover over these last couple of days? How have you had to change your approach?
For instance, I realized in general, finger pressure is something I have to think about on my instrument, because my strings are quite high compared to almost any other violin. But I noticed with this instrument, if I actually release even more than I am comfortable with in terms of the amount of finger pressure I put, the sound becomes a lot bigger. And I'm actually not used to that because I get the opposite reaction on my instrument to a certain degree. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I have a similar approach, change of approach, because the cello I normally use has higher strings, and that was done to help with the projection because the instrument I'm using, the upper register suffers a little bit. It has a really great bass, but I find some difficulties getting the top strings to project. Whereas with something like this, it's so well-rounded, and the strings are substantially lower. And so I've also found that I don't have to press as hard. My arm is just not as tired. Both arms, actually.
Okay.
I find I have to, with my other cello, I muscle out a lot of things to get the projection I need. Whereas with this instrument, the second that I apply too much arm weight, the sound just doesn't come out.
Yeah, so
Whereas
you kind of have to just kind of let it happen on its own more?
yeah,
or is it sort of-
it's about actually, I can use faster bow speed
Okay.
in general to create bigger sound on this particular instrument.
What about on the bets? How have you found?
I mean, I think the thing about all of these old instruments, they have their own personality as well. So I'm very lucky that I have a violin normally on loan that it's actually older than this instrument, from 1680, also from Cremona by Francesco Ruggieri, and that has its own personality, which is very different than this violin. But it has like certain corks that I've had to kind of find my way around, and there are different corks on this instrument that I've had to kind of find my way around. But the thing that I truly appreciate about and I'm fascinated by this instrument, the purity of the sound is unlike any other violin that I've ever played. And so from that purity, like all of the colors, are available, but it starts from like the most pure form of the violin sound, and yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. One thing that I found so interesting is when you guys first sat down, you were just kind of playing chords and then scales. And is that how you normally rehearse, or was that just a special thing because you're getting used to the sound of the instruments?
I think both. We don't do it every single day, although we did for a long period of time. But I think to just kind of take, away from the music, to take a moment to just kind of like really homogenize our quartet sounds, see what the timbres of the instruments were like, how the sounds blend, how we hear ourselves within the group, which is also a very important thing, and to do that before launching into the repertoire, to really like kind of in a vacuum, more or less, to see how we perceived our sounds within the group and how different that. It was actually, for me, it was wildly different. I think because of the nature of this viol, I think we all actually said similar things, and maybe it has something to do with the stage, but we heard a lot of ourselves. And I think part of that, though, is that these instruments have so much presence and profile that having the instrument right here, it's a powerful thing. So to then, okay, I have to really try extra hard to hear across the stage. But it's been really fun.
Yeah. Did you have to sort of think differently about tuning then at any point?
I wouldn't say so much about we've had to tune a lot because the instruments were just set up differently. They were set up for the classical style of playing, so they were with gut strings, different bridges,
Right.
and tuned at a much lower pitch. So they've been wanting to kind of make their way back down to 415, and we're above 440. So yeah. But I mean, other than that, I mean, we still tune in the same fashion that we do normally.
There are quirky things regarding intonation that specific instruments can react to, like these things called like wolf tones, where an instrument, like it's actually like the body of the instrument getting overhauled by vibrations, and sometimes it kicks the pitch flat or sharp. And so like definitely individual things with the instruments that one needs to figure out how to compensate for with left hand weight or bow contact or bow speed. There are kind of ways of manipulating around certain things with the instruments. And I think the more impressive the instrument, actually sometimes the more fussy these individual things can be, because there's so much vibration happening within the instrument, that these things do crop up maybe a little bit more than with some modern instruments.
Okay.
And this cello, the string length is longer than what my current cello. So there's some adjusting as I go up the instrument. In particular, this region, I'm having to stretch a little more to reach the intervals. It reminds me, the spacing reminds me of a cello that I used to use before the one I'm using now, which was a little larger. So I'm kind of rewinding back to that time where kind of, okay, the spacing is just got to stretch a little further to reach that.
Yeah. One thing that I actually noticed yesterday too was that, that some adjustments sort of had to be made by John Montgomery, who we brought in to sort of work on the instruments. And I'm curious, what was it that specifically had to be fixed? Was it your viola, I think, that you kind
it
of
was
had to
funny
have certain
because
adjustments?
I was practicing back in one of the dressing rooms and everything was totally fine. And I think it had to actually do with how the fine tuners were. They were all a little bit too loose. And for some reason, just coming out on stage and playing, there was like a kind of an intense buzzing sound that was happening. And so we kind of just tried to, buzzing instruments it can be weird to find. It could be the tailpiece, it could be the chin rest vibrating against the tailpiece. But we actually just found with screwing in all these fine tuners a little bit more that it kind of just went away.
Okay.
And then Ryan needed a little tweak as well.
Yeah, because the wolf tones on C in particular, you can adjust the post within the violin, and sometimes it can change the sound drastically in an effort to get rid of the wolf, but he was able to knock it a little bit and keep the sound and reduce the wolf a little bit.
Okay. Well, I'd like to just segue a little bit into the program. And you had mentioned that the Emerson String Quartet kind of gave you guidance about how to make programs. And so how did you come about making this particular program? It's interesting to me, anyway, that there are two quartets in A minor, one by Mendelssohn and one by Brahms. And so, how did you come up with this particular program? What was the...
Well, I mean, it's always been some time since we've selected programs, so it's always hard to remember the beginnings. But I do think that, I mean, since we are playing these important instruments, we wanted to play a piece. The Mendelssohn is a very important piece to the quartet, and it was the first piece that we ever played as a quartet. So we wanted to kind of showcase the instruments that way, because it's a very special piece to us. And no program can go without Haydn. I mean, as Stradivarius was to instruments, Haydn was to the string quartet. He was kind of the inventor of the string quartet. So we'd be remiss if we left Haydn off of the... And it's one of his biggest, most grand works too. So where he's really fully developed, and that's a really amazing piece. And the Brahms, I think, is also, I mean, yes, it's in the same key as the Mendelssohn, but it's a very different atmosphere. And to showcase the sonority of the instruments, I think we really wanted to bring that out.
Practically speaking, we also wanted to choose pieces that we knew very well, that are in our blood, because we knew there was going to be this adapting process to the instruments.
Of course.
And we had to keep that in mind as well. We didn't want to debut a new work that we just learned or something like that, because we wanted to have one constant variable while another was changing.
No, of course. Makes sense. Wonderful. Now, I'm curious, like, in relationship to the Brahms, do you guys have all three quartets in your repertoire, if so, I mean, do you find that you gravitate towards one quartet more than the others?
We will have all three of them relatively soon. We actually would have had all three of them if the pandemic hadn't have gotten in the way.
We would have had a lot of things.
This is actually our
I like things.
This is really kind of our first time after a long period of time, or our first season rather, after a long period of time,
Right.
that we're coming back to the Brahms A minor quartet. We actually learned it very early on in our quartet's history, and it's a fun thing coming back to it, and having interpreted so many other works since then, seeing how our lens and perception has changed. It's a very different work than the first quartet, with very different challenges. And I think we all agreed that our perception of the challenges of this work are very different than how we thought of it 8-9 years ago. Like, I remember right when our quartet was starting working on this piece, I remember not thinking that balancing the piece was all of that difficult. And then coming back to it, it's like, wait, this is actually really hard to get all the voices heard, but in balance, and the right primary voice out at all times, because it's very kind of thick, and the voices overlap one another so frequently that, like, if first violin has the melody and everyone else is playing down low, it speaks out very clearly. But the minute everybody's kind of fused in
Yeah,
towards
more
the
in the
middle,
same range.
you
yeah.
really have to adjust the levers. So if it says everybody must play forte, it often means 3 people need to be mezzo piano, mezzo forte, and then 1 person quasi double forte. So taking the meaning of what the composer meant on the page, but adjusting the levers so that actually comes across in a unified sense, even though the individuals are doing sometimes very different things from what's printed in front of them. So it's uniquely challenging in that regard.
And what's striking me right now, between the first and the second quartets, even just in the big sonata first movements, the C minor quartet is very rhythmically driven. Like the viola has has eighth notes almost the entire movement. Where this quartet, the tempo is constantly changing. Sometimes it's marked by him, and sometimes we have to kind of make that interpretive decision to change the tempo to help certain things along. So in those, I don't know, even though they're written so close to one another, they're very different beasts.
I also forgot to mention, we've all had moments in the past 24 hours while rehearsing the Brahms where we've said, hey, you know this tricky part for the balance? I think with this, it's fine. Like, I think I can just play loud enough that it's not a problem. So it is really fun playing with these instruments where they have that extra gear where, like, normally, I can speak especially as a violist, where a lot of violas, it's really hard to kick the tone of your instrument all the way to the back of a hall. Like, the pitch will make it, but because it's just a more mellow by nature timbred instrument, that's kind of the difficulty, especially sitting on the outside of the stage. So having like an instrument as amazing as this, where like not only the pitch and the power, but the tone and beauty of the instrument goes all the way to the back row, it allows other possibilities than just like trying to play as loud as humanly possible, it's really fun.
I was just thinking about, because we were talking about pairing the Mendelssohn with the Brahms, I think you hear that influence that Brahms would have taken from that particular piece. If you listen to the third movement of the Brahms, which is a minuet scherzo combo, you hear that he's trying to kind of one-up Mendelssohn. There's this really quirky kind of scherzo. And in the Mendelssohn is a very similar character. There's something a little less easy to capture in the Brahms in general. The colors and the atmospheres are quite nuanced. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why coming back to it some like 10 years later, I think we're able to, we have a few more tools under our belt to dig a little further into the music itself, instead of this is loud, this is soft, this is happy, this is sad. There's like the spectrum is so wide with his music, which makes it very difficult.
And you had talked briefly about the Haydn. It is one of the longer and more complex quartets of his. So is this a piece that you guys play regularly as well, or have you surveyed many of the Haydn quartets, or is this one that you?
We played all 68. No, we know some quartets that have.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've played quite a bit of the early ones, and we've played quite a bit of the late ones. We have played a few in the middle, but the Opus 77s, we've done that set of 2, and a few of the 76s as well. And this is, in his old age, this is Haydn having fully developed this form that he invented. And it's very interesting, he was writing these pieces the same time Beethoven was writing his early string quartets, and Mozart was writing string quartets in dedication to Haydn. And so Haydn was the unrivaled master at the time when he was writing these. And I think there's so much invention. Maybe we don't always consider, or when Haydn doesn't always come to mind in the same level as Beethoven and Mozart in terms of the reverence that some people have for them, but we'd like to argue that he's right up there with them. The beauty of the quality of the melodies that he creates, the inventiveness of the textures, and the way the piece holds together as a whole is very, very compelling. There's no dud movement or moment in it.
Great. Thank you so much for having this short conversation about your experience playing the Stradivarius instruments, and we wish you all the best for the concert.